I am back. What's up, everybody? It's G Mr. Drew here to welcome you to another episode of the Andrew Glowczewski Experience, episode 248. We're going to continue studying these assault rifles, breaking them down, and yeah, man. I still got Dune playing in the background, Dune audiobook playing in the background, and other than that, let's uh, let's just get into it. Oh, losing my pencils here. Hold on. There's one. And two. Perfect. So yeah, man, let's just get into it. We finished off the last page. It was a 3-hour stream. This one is probably going to be another 3-hour stream. So let's watch me get super tired as I go.
When I'm now the Duke, Paul thought. He felt the thought gall him, but he could not deny the wisdom in what they did. Something had happened to his awareness this night. He saw with sharpened clarity every circumstance and occurrence around him. He felt unable to stop the inflow of data or the cold precision with which each new item was added to his knowledge, and the computation was centered in his awareness. It was mentat power and more. Paul thought back to the moment of impotent rage as the strange Thopter dived out of the night onto them, swooping like a giant hawk above the desert with wind screaming through its wings. The thing in Paul's mind had happened then. The Thopter had skidded and slewed across a sand ridge toward the running figures, his mother and himself. Paul remembered how the smell of burned sulfur from abrasion of Thopter skids against sand had drifted across them. His mother, he knew, had turned, expected to meet a laser gun in the hands of Harkonnen mercenaries, and had recognized Duncan Idaho leaning out the Thopter's open door, shouting, "Hurry! There's worms flying south of you!" But Paul had known as he turned who piloted the Thopter. An accumulation of minutiae in the way it was flown, the dash of the landing, clues so small even his mother hadn't detected them, had told Paul precisely who sat at those controls. Across the still tent from Paul, Jessica stirred, said, "There can be only one explanation. The Harkonnens held you as wife. He hated the Harkonnens. I cannot be wrong about that. You read his note. But why has he saved us from the carnage?" She is only now seeing it, and that poorly, Paul thought. The thought was the shock. He had known this fact as a by-the-way thing while reading the note that had accompanied the ducal signet in the pack. "Do not try to forgive me," Huey had written. "I do not want your forgiveness. I already have enough burdens. What I have done was done without malice or hope of another's understanding. It is my own Tahadi al-Burhan, my ultimate test. I give you the Atreides ducal signet as token that I write truly. By the time you read this, Duke Leto will be dead. Take consolation from my assurance that he did not die alone, that one we hate above all others died with him." It had not been addressed or signed, but there'd been no mistaking the familiar scrawl. Huey's. Remembering the letter, Paul re-examined the distress of that moment, a thing sharp and strange that seemed to happen outside his new mental alertness. He had read that his father was dead.
Oh, I'm all the way off
this. Of the words.
Ugh.
Felt them as no more than another datum to be entered in his mind.
There we go. Sorry about that.
I loved my father, Paul thought, and knew this for truth. I should warn him. I should feel something. But he felt nothing except, here's an important fact. It was one with all the other facts. All the while his mind was adding sense impressions, extrapolating, computing. Halleck's words came back to Paul. "Mood's a thing for cattle or for making love. You fight when a necessity arises no matter your mood." Perhaps that's it, Paul thought. I'll mourn my father later, when there's time. But he felt no let-up in the cold precision of his being. He sensed that his new awareness was only a beginning, that it was growing. The sense of terrible purpose he'd first experienced in his ordeal with the Reverend Mother Gaia's Helen Mohiam pervaded him. His right hand, the hand of remembered pain, tingled and throbbed. Is this what it is to be the Kwisatz Haderach? He wondered. For a while I thought Howard had failed us again, Jessica said. I thought perhaps Yuri wasn't a Stook doctor. He was everything we thought him, and more, Paul said. And he thought, why is she so slow seeing these things? He said, if Idaho doesn't get through to Kynes, we'll be... He's not our only hope, she said. Such was not my suggestion, he said. She heard the steel in his voice, the sense of command, and stared across the grey darkness of the still tent at him. Paul was a silhouette against moon-frosted rocks, seen through the tent's transparent end. Others among your father's men will have escaped, she said. We must regather them, find... We will depend upon ourselves, he said. Our immediate concern is our family atomics. We must get them before the Harkonnens can search them out. Not likely they'll be found, she said, the way they were hidden. It must not be left to chance. And she thought, blackmail with the family atomics as a threat to the planet and its spice. That's what he has in mind. But all he can hope for then is escape into renegade anonymity. His mother's words had provoked another train of thought in Paul, a duke's concern for all the people they'd lost this night. People are the true strength of a great house, Paul thought. And he remembered Howard's words. Parting with people is a sadness. A place is only a place. They're using Sardaukar, Jessica said. We must wait until the Sardaukar have been withdrawn. They think us caught between the desert and the Sardaukar, Paul said. They intend that there be no Atreides survivors. Total extermination. Do not count on any of our people escaping. They cannot go on indefinitely risking exposure of the Emperor's part in this, can't they? Some of our people are bound to escape. Are they? Jessica turned away, frightened of the bitter strength in her son's voice, hearing the precise assessment of chances. She sensed that his mind had leaped ahead of her, that it now saw more in some respects than she did. She had helped train the intelligence which did this, but now she found herself fearful of it. Her thoughts turned, seeking toward the lost sanctuary of her duke, and tears burned her eyes. This is the way it had to be, Leto, she thought. A time of love and a time of grief. She rested her hand on her abdomen, awareness focused on the embryo there. I am the Atreides daughter I was ordered to produce. But the Reverend Mother was wrong. A daughter wouldn't have saved my Leto. This child is only life reaching for the future in the midst of death. I conceived out of instinct and not out of obedience. Try the Communinet receiver again, Paul said. The mind goes on working no matter how we try to hold it back, she thought. Jessica found the tiny receiver Idaho had left for them, flipped its switch. A green light glowed on the instrument's face. Tinny screeching came from its speaker. She reduced the volume, hunted across the bands. A voice speaking Atreides battle language came into the tent. Pack and regroup at the ridge. Fedor reports no survivors in Carthag, and the guild bank has been sacked. Carthag, Jessica thought. That was a Harkonnen hotbed. There's Sardaukar, the voice said. Watch out for Sardaukar in Atreides uniforms. They're... A roaring filled the speaker. Then silence. Try the other bands, Paul said. Do you realize what that means? Jessica asked. I expected it. They want the guild to blame us for destruction of their bank. With the guild against us, we're trapped on Arrakis. Try the other bands. She weighed his words. I expected it. What had happened to him? Slowly, Jessica returned to the instrument. As she moved the band slide, they caught glimpses of violence in the few voices calling out in Atreides battle language. Fall back! Try to regroup it. Trapped in a cave at... And there was no mistaking the victorious exultation in the Harkonnen gibberish that poured from the other bands. Sharp commands, battle reports. There wasn't enough of it for Jessica to register and break the language, but the tone was obvious. Harkonnen victory. Paul shook the pack beside him, hearing the 2 liter-johns of water gurgle there. He took a deep breath, looked up through the transparent end of the tent at the rock escarpment outlined against the stars. His left hand felt the sphincter seal of the tent's entrance. "It'll be dawn soon," he said. "We can wait through the day for Idaho, but not through another night. In the desert you must travel by night and rest in shade through the day." Remembered law insinuated itself into Jessica's mind. Without a still suit, a man sitting in shade on the desert needs 5 liters of water a day to maintain body weight. She felt the slick, soft skin of the still suit against her body, thinking how their lives depended on these garments. "If we leave here, Idaho can't find us," she said. "There are ways to make any man talk," he said. "If Idaho hasn't returned by dawn, we must consider the possibility he has been captured. How long do you think he could hold out?" The question required no answer, and she sat in silence. Paul lifted the seal on the pack, pulled out a tiny micro-manual with glow tab and magnifier. Green and orange letters leaped up at him from the pages. Liter-johns, still tent, energy caps, recats, sand snork, binoculars, still suit rep kit, Faraday pistol, sync chart, filter plugs, paracompass, maker hooks, thumpers, frame kit, fire pillar. So many things for survival on the desert. Presently he put the manual aside on the tent floor. "Where can we possibly go?" Jessica asked. "My father spoke of desert power," Paul said. "The Harkonnens cannot rule this planet without it. They've never ruled this planet, nor shall they. Not even with 10,000 legions of Sardaukar." "Paul, you can't think that..." "We've all the evidence in our hands," he said. "Right here in this tent. The tent itself, this pack and its contents, these still suits. We know the Guild wants a prohibitive price for weather satellites. We know that... What have weather satellites got to do with it?" she asked. "They couldn't possibly..." She broke off. Paul sensed the hyper-alertness of his mind reading her reactions, computing on minutiae. "You see it now," he said. "Satellites watch the terrain below. There are things in the deep desert that will not bear frequent inspection." "You're suggesting the Guild itself controls this planet?" She was so slow. "No," he said. "The Fremen. They're paying the Guild for privacy. Paying in a coin that's freely available to anyone with desert power. Spice. This is more than a second approximation answer. It's the straight-line computation. Depend on it." "Paul," Jessica said, "you're not a Mentat yet. You can't know for sure how..." "I'll never be a Mentat," he said. "I'm something else. A freak. Paul, how can you say such... Leave me alone." He turned away from her, looking out into the night. Why can't I mourn? He wondered. He felt that every fibre of his being craved this release, but it would be denied him forever. Jessica had never heard such distress in her son's voice. She wanted to reach out to him, hold him, comfort him, help him, but she sensed there was nothing she could do. He had to solve this problem by himself. The glowing tab of the Frem Kit manual between them on the tent floor caught her eye. She lifted it, glanced at the flyleaf, reading, "Manual of the Friendly Desert, the place full of life. Here are the ayat and burhan of life. Believe and Allah shall never burn you." It reads like the Ajar book, she thought, recalling her studies of the great secrets. Has a manipulator of religions been on Arrakis? Paul lifted the paracompass from the pack, returned it, said, "Think of all these special application Fremen machines. They show unrivaled sophistication. Admit it. The culture that made these things betrays depths no one suspected." Hesitating, still worried by the harshness in his voice, Jessica returned to the book, studied an illustrated constellation from the Arakeen sky. Muad'Dib, the mouse, and noted that the tail pointed north. Paul stared into the tense darkness at the dimly discerned movements of his mother, revealed by the manual's glow tab. Now is the time to carry out my father's wish, he thought. I must give her his message now, while she has time for grief. Grief would inconvenience us later. And he found himself shocked by precise logic. Mother, he said. Yes. She heard the change in his voice, felt coldness in her entrails at the sound. Never had she heard such harsh control. My father is dead, he said. She searched within herself for the coupling of fact and fact and fact, the Bene Gesserit way of assessing data, and it came to her, the sensation of terrifying loss. Jessica nodded, unable to speak. My father charged me once, Paul said, to give you a message if anything happened to him. He feared you might believe he distrusted you. That useless suspicion, she thought. He wanted you to know he never suspected you, Paul said, and explained the deception, adding, he wanted you to know he always trusted you completely, always loved you and cherished you. He said he would sooner have mistrusted himself, and he had but one regret, that he never made you his duchess. She brushed the tears coursing down her cheeks, thought, what a stupid waste of the body's water. But she knew this thought for what it was, the attempt to retreat from grief into anger. Later, my later, she thought. What terrible things we do to those we love. With a violent motion, she extinguished the little manual's glow tab. Sobs shook her. Paul heard his mother's grief and felt the emptiness within himself. I have no grief, he thought. Why? Why? He felt the inability to grieve as a terrible flaw. A time to get and time to lose, Jessica thought, quoting to herself from the OC Bible. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time for love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. Paul's mind had gone on in its chilling precision. He saw the avenues ahead of them on this hostile planet. Without even the safety valve of dreaming, he focused his prescient awareness, seeing it as a computation of most probable futures, but with something more, an edge of mystery, as though his mind dipped into some timeless stratum and sampled the winds of the future. Abruptly, as though he had found a necessary key, Paul's mind climbed another notch in awareness. He felt himself clinging to this new level, clutching at a precarious hold and peering about. It was as though he existed within a globe, with avenues radiating away in all directions. Yet this only approximated the sensation. He remembered once seeing a gauze kerchief blowing in the wind, and now he sensed the future as though it twisted across some surface as undulant and impermanent as that of the wind-blown kerchief. He saw people. He felt the heat and cold of uncounted probabilities. He knew names and places, experienced emotions without number, reviewed data of innumerable unexplored planets. There was time to probe, and test, and taste, but no time to shape. The thing was a spectrum of possibilities, from the most remote past to the most remote future, from the most probable to the most improbable. He saw his own death in countless ways. He saw new planets, new countries.
Why is he seeing all this shit?
People.
What prompted
He
it?
saw them in such swarms they could not be listed, yet his mind catalogued them. Even the guildsmen. And he thought, the guild. There'd be a way for us, my strangeness accepted, as a familiar thing of high value, always with an assured supply of the now necessary spice. But the idea of living out his life in the mind groping ahead through possible futures that guided hurtling spaceships appalled him. It was a way, though, and in meeting the possible future that contained guildsmen, he recognized his own strangeness. I have another kind of sight. I see another kind of terrain. The available paths. The awareness conveyed both reassurance and alarm. So many places on that other kind of terrain dipped or turned out of his sight. As swiftly as it had come, the sensation slipped away from him, and he realized the entire experience had taken the space of a heartbeat. Yet his own personal awareness had been turned over, illuminated in a terrifying way. He stared around him. Night still covered the still tent within its rock-enclosed hideaway. His mother's grief could still be heard. His own lack of grief could still be felt. That hollow place, somewhere separated from his mind, which went on in its steady pace, dealing with data, evaluating, computing, submitting answers in something like the Mentat way. And now he saw that he had a wealth of data few such minds ever before had encompassed. But this made the empty place within him no easier to bear. He felt that something must shatter. It was as though a clockwork control for a bomb had been set to ticking within him. It went on about its business no matter what he wanted. It recorded minuscule shadings of difference around him, a slight change in moisture, a fractional fall in temperature, the progress of an insect across their still tent roof, the solemn approach of dawn in the star-lighted patch of sky he could see out the tent's transparent end. The emptiness was unbearable. Knowing how the clockwork had been set in motion made no difference. He could look to his own past and see the start of it. The training, the sharpening of talents, the refined pressures of sophisticated disciplines, even exposure to the OC Bible at a critical moment. And, lastly, the heavy intake of spice. And he could look ahead, the most terrifying direction, to see where it all pointed. I'm a monster, he thought. A freak. No, he said. Then, no, no, no! He found that he was pounding the tent floor with his fists. The implacable part of him recorded this as an interesting emotional datum and fed it into computation. Paul! His mother was beside him, holding his hands, her face a grey blob peering at him. Paul, what's wrong? You, he said. I'm here, Paul, she said. It's all right. What have you done to me? He demanded. In a burst of clarity, she sensed some of the roots in the question, said, I gave birth to you. It was, from instinct as much as her own subtle knowledge, the precisely correct answer to calm him. He felt her hands holding him, focused on the dim outline of her face. Certain gene traces in her facial structure were noted in a new way by his on-flowing mind. The clues added to other data, and a final summation answer put forward. Let go of me, he said. She heard the iron in his voice, obeyed. Do you want to tell me what's wrong, Paul? Did you know what you were doing when you trained me? He asked. There's no more childhood in his voice, she thought. And she said, I hoped the thing any parent hopes, that you'd be superior, different. Different? She heard the bitterness in his tone, said, Paul, you didn't want a son, he said. You wanted a Kwisatz Haderach. You wanted a male Bene Gesserit. She recoiled from his bitterness. But Paul, did you ever consult my father in this? She spoke gently out of the freshness of her grief. Whatever you are, Paul, the heredity is as much your father as me. But not the training, he said. Not the things that awakened the sleeper. Sleeper? It's here. He put a hand to his head and then to his breast. In me. It goes on and on and on and on and Paul! She had heard the hysteria edging his voice. Listen to me, he said. You wanted the Reverend Mother to hear about my dreams. You listen in her place now. I've just had a waking dream. Do you know why? You must calm yourself, she said. If there's... The spice, he said. It's in everything here. The air, the soil, the food. The geriatric spice. It's like the truth-sayer drug. It's a poison. She stiffened. His voice lowered, and he repeated, a poison. So subtle, so insidious, so irreversible, it won't even kill you unless you stop taking it. We can't leave Arrakis unless we take part of Arrakis with us. The terrifying presence of his voice brooked no dispute. You and the spice, Paul said. The spice changes anyone who gets this much of it, but thanks to you, I could bring the change to consciousness. I don't get to leave it in the unconscious where its disturbance can be blanked out. I can see it. Paul, I see it, he repeated. She heard madness in his voice, didn't know what to do. But he spoke again, and she heard the iron control return to him. We're trapped here. We're trapped here, she agreed. And she accepted the truth of his words.
Oh, great.
No pressure
Oh, my leg is going to sleep. Oh, this is like last week. I just sit down for too long and my ass starts going to sleep.
So here we live out our lives, she thought, on this hell planet. The place is
Hold on, give me a second. Let me.
And there's no doubt about it.
Shit.
A brood mare preserving an important bloodline for the Bene Gesserit clan.
My leg about to have one of them Quizak Satarak dreams.
Paul said. Now there was fury in his voice. To be sure you accept what I say, I'll tell you first, I know you will bear a daughter, my sister, here on Arrakis. Jessica placed her hands against the tent floor, pressed back against the curving fabric wall to still a pang of fear. She knew her pregnancy could not show yet. Only her own Bene Gesserit training had allowed her to read the first faint signals of her body, to know of the embryo only a few weeks old. Only to serve, Jessica whispered, clinging to the Bene Gesserit motto. We exist only to serve. We'll find a home among the Fremen, Paul said. Your Missionaria Protectiva has brought us a bolt hole. They've prepared a way for us in the desert, Jessica told herself. But how can he know the Missionaria Protectiva? She found it increasingly difficult to subdue her terror at the overpowering strangeness in Paul. He studied the dark shadow of her, seeing her fear and every reaction with his new awareness, as though she were outlined in blinding light. A beginning of compassion for her crept over him. The things that can happen here I cannot begin to tell you, he said. I cannot even begin to tell myself, although I've seen them. This sense of the future, I seem to have no control over it. The thing just happens. The immediate future, say a year, I can see some of that. A road as broad as our central avenue on Caladan. Some places I don't see, shadowed places, as though it went behind a hill. And again he thought of the surface of a blowing kerchief. And there are branchings. He fell silent as memory of that seeing filled him. No prescient dream, no experience of his life had quite prepared him for the totality with which the veils had been ripped away to reveal naked time. Recalling the experience, he recognized his own terrible purpose, the pressure of his life spreading outward like an expanding bubble, time retreating before it. Jessica found the tent's glow tab control, activated it. Dim green light drove back the shadows, easing her fear. She looked at Paul's face, his eyes, the inward stare, and she knew where she had seen such a look before. Pictured in records of disasters, on the faces of children who experienced starvation or terrible injury. The eyes were like pits, mouth a straight line, cheeks indrawn. It's the look of terrible awareness, she thought, of someone forced to the knowledge of his own mortality. He was indeed no longer a child. The underlying import of his words began to take over in her mind, pushing all else aside. Paul could see ahead, a way of escape for them. "There's a way to evade the Harkonnens," she said. "The Harkonnens," he sneered. "Put those twisted humans out of your mind." He stared at his mother, studying the lines of her face in the light of the glowtap. The lines betrayed her. She said, "You shouldn't refer to people as humans without—" "Don't be so sure you know where to draw the line," he said. "We carry our past with us. And mother mine, there's a thing you don't know, and should. We are Harkonnens."
Oh,
Her
shit.
mind did a terrifying thing. It blanked out, as though it needed to shut off all sensation. But Paul's voice went on at that implacable pace, dragging her with it.
So,
"When next you find a mirror..."
so they just went to sleep or something? And then when he went to sleep, he just had like a really dope, crazy dream. My leg is not sleeping anymore. Let's see how long it lasts. I'm guessing that's what happened. Like, cause it just went out of nowhere where they were like chilling, and then all of a sudden he started tripping. So I'm guessing they went to sleep, and now, he flipped out. He's like, "Oh my god, I just had a crazy dream," but it was like way more crazy. I'm guessing it's because they're out in the desert now, where the spice is real, and then she's all super preggers, so she's like kind of at a handicap right now, and they're just dealing with the situation. I'm guessing that's what happened because I don't know, man. I already rewound twice. I don't want to rewind anymore to try to figure out like what's going on with like I miss a sentence and all of a sudden things just kind of turn on a dime. But anyways, I'm just gonna say that's what happened. Is they just went to sleep and his dreams just got crazy just because they're out in the desert where the spice is real. Had nothing to do with anything like obvious. It wasn't like hey, drink this, and then like he drank it, and then all this crazy shit happened. It was just like no, it all just kind of happened. Just a little weird. I don't know. Maybe I just missed it, but whatever.
"Study mine now. The traces are there if you don't blind yourself. Look at my hands, the set of my bones. If none of this convinces you, then take my word for it. I've walked the future. I've looked at a record. I've seen a place. I have all the data. We're Harkonnens." "A renegade branch of the family," she said. "That's it, isn't it? Some Harkonnen cousin who—" "You're the Baron's own daughter," he said, and watched the way she pressed her hands to her mouth. "The Baron sampled many pleasures in his youth, and once permitted himself to be seduced. But it was for the genetic purposes of the Bene Gesserit, by one of you." The way he said "you" struck her like a slap, but it set her mind to working, and she could not deny his words. So many blank ends of meaning in her past reached out now and linked. The daughter the Bene Gesserit wanted. It wasn't to end the old Atreides-Harkonnen feud, but to fix some genetic factor in their lines. What? She groped for an answer. As though he saw inside her mind, Paul said, "They thought they were reaching for me, but I'm not what they expected, and I've arrived before my time, and they don't know it." Jessica pressed her hands to her mouth. "Great Mother, he's the Kwisatz Haderach." She felt exposed and naked before him, realizing then that he saw her with eyes from which little could be hidden, and that, she knew, was the basis of her fear. "You're thinking I'm the Kwisatz Haderach," she said. "Put that out of your mind. I'm something unexpected." "I must get the word out to one of the schools," she thought. "The mating index may show what has happened." "They won't learn about me until it's too late," he said. She sought to divert him, lowered her hands and said, "We'll find a place among the Fremen." "The Fremen have a saying they credit to Shai Hulud, Old Father Eternity," he said. "They say, 'Be prepared to appreciate what you meet.'" And he thought, yes, mother mine, among the Fremen. You'll acquire the blue eyes and a callus beside your lovely nose from the filter tube to your still suit. And you'll bear my sister, said Aliyah of the Knife. If you're not the Kwisatz Haderach, Jessica said. What? You couldn't possibly know, he said. You won't believe it until you see it. And he thought, I'm a seed. He suddenly saw how fertile was the ground into which he had fallen, and with this realization, the terrible purpose filled him, creeping through the empty place within, surely I cannot choose that way, he thought. But he saw again in his mind's eye the shrine of his father's skull, and the violence with the green and black banner.
Was that the end?
When my father, the Padishah Emperor, heard of Duke Leto's death and the
No.
manner of it, he
Okay.
went into such a rage as
We're
we
like
had
2/3
never
do this
before.
thing.
He blamed my mother and the compact forced on him to place the Bene Gesserit on the throne.
Of the first
He
half.
blamed
2/3
me
through the
and
first
evil
half.
Baron. He blamed everyone in sight, not excepting even me, for he said I was a witch like all the others. And when I sought to comfort him, saying it was done according to an older law of self-preservation, to which even the most ancient rulers gave allegiance, he sneered at me and asked if I thought him a weakling. I saw then that he had been aroused to this passion not by concern over the dead duke, but by what that death implied for all royalty. As I look back on it, I think there may have been some prescience in my father too, for it is certain that his line and Muad'Dib's shared common ancestry. In my father's house by the Princess Irulan.
Now Harkonnen shall kill Harkonnen, Paul whispered. He had awakened shortly before nightfall, sitting up in the steeled and darkened still tent. As he spoke, he heard the vague stirrings of his mother, where she slept against the tent's opposite wall. Paul glanced at the proximity detector on the floor. studying the dials illuminated in the blackness by phosphor tubes. "It should be night soon," his mother said. "Why don't you lift the tent shades?" Paul realized then that her breathing had been different for some time, that she had lain silent in the darkness until certain he was awake. "Lifting the shades wouldn't help," he said. "There's been a storm. The tent's covered by sand. I'll dig us out soon." "No sign of Duncan yet?" "None." Paul rubbed absently at the ducal signet on his thumb, and a sudden rage against the very substance of this planet, which had helped kill his father, set him trembling. "I heard the storm begin," Jessica said. The undemanding emptiness of her words helped restore some of his calm. His mind focused on the storm as he had seen it begin through the transparent end of their still tent. Cold dribbles of sand crossing the basin, then runnels and tails furrowing the sky. He had looked up to a rock spire, seen it change shape under the blast, becoming a low, cheddar-coloured wedge. Sand funneled into their basin and shadowed the sky with dull curry, then blotted out all light as the tent was covered. Tent bows had creaked once as they accepted the pressure, then silence, broken only by the dim bellows wheezing of their sand snorkel pumping air from the surface. "Try the receiver again," Jessica said. "No use," he said. He found his stillsuit's water tube in its clip at his neck, drew a warm swallow into his mouth, and he thought that here he truly began an Arakeen existence, living on reclaimed moisture from his own breath and body. It was flat and tasteless water, but it soothed his throat. Jessica heard Paul drinking, felt the slickness of her own still suit clinging to her body, but she refused to accept her thirst. To accept it would require awakening fully into the terrible necessities of Arrakis, where they must guard even fractional traces of moisture, hoarding the few drops in the tent's catch pockets, begrudging a breath wasted on the open air. So much easier to drift back down into sleep. But there had been a dream in this day's sleep, and she shivered at the memory of it. She had held dreaming hands beneath sandflow where a name had been written, Duke Leto Atreides. The name had blurred with the sand, and she had moved to restore it, but the first letter filled before the last was begun. The sand would not stop. Her dream became wailing, louder and louder, that ridiculous wailing. Part of her mind had realized that the sound was her own voice as a tiny child, little more than a baby. A woman not quite visible to memory was going away. My unknown mother, Jessica thought. The Bene Gesserit who bore me and gave me to the sisters because that's what she was commanded to do. Was she glad to rid herself of a Harkonnen child? The place to hit them is in the spice, Paul said. How can he think of attack at a time like this? She asked herself. An entire planet full of spice, she said. How can you hit them there? She heard him stirring, the sound of their pack being dragged across the tent floor. It was sea power and air power on Caladan, he said. Here it's desert power. The Fremen are the key. His voice came from the vicinity of a tense sphincter. A Bene Gesserit training sensed in his tone an unresolved bitterness toward her. All his life he has been trained to hate Harkonnens, she thought. Now he finds he is Harkonnen because of me. How little he knows me. I was my Duke's only woman. I accepted his life and his values, even to defying my Bene Gesserit orders. The tent's glow tab came alight under Paul's hand, filled the domed area with green radiance. Paul crouched at the sphincter, his stillsuit hood adjusted for the open desert, forehead capped, mouth filter in place, nose plugs adjusted. Only his dark eyes were visible, a narrow band of face that turned once toward her and away. Secure yourself for the open, he said, and his voice was blurred behind the filter. Jessica pulled the filter across her mouth, began adjusting her hood as she watched Paul break the tent seal. Sand rasped as he opened the sphincter, and
Okay.
a blurred fizzle of grains ran into the tent before he could immobilize it with a static compaction tool. A hole grew in the sand wall as the tool realigned the grains. He slipped out, and her ears followed his progress to the surface. What will we find out there? She wondered. Harkonnen troops and the Sardaukar? Those are dangers we can expect. But what are the dangers we don't know? She thought of the compaction tool and the other strange instruments in the pack. Each of these tools suddenly stood in her mind as a sign of mysterious dangers. She felt then a hot breeze from surface sand touch her cheeks where they were exposed above the filter. Pass up the pack. It was Paul's voice, low and guarded. She moved to obey, heard the water leiter-johns gurgle as she shoved the pack across the floor. She peered upward, saw Paul framed against stars. Here, he said, and reached down, pulled the pack to the surface. Now she saw only the circle of stars. They were like the luminous tips of weapons aimed down at her. A shower of meteors crossed her patch of night. The meteors seemed to her like a warning, like tiger stripes, like luminous grave slats clavering her blood. And she felt the chill of the price on their heads. Hurry up, Paul said. I want to collapse the tent. A shower of sand from the surface brushed her left hand. How much sand will the hand hold? She asked herself. Shall I help you? Paul asked. No. She swallowed in a dry throat, slipped into the hole, felt static, packed sand rasp under her hands. Paul reached down, took her arm. She stood beside him on a smooth patch of starlit desert, stared around. Sand almost brimmed their basin, leaving only a dim lip of surrounding rock. She probed the farther darkness with her trained senses. Noise of small animals. Birds. A pall of dislodged sand and faint creature sounds within it. Paul collapsing their tent, recovering it up the hole. Starlight displaced just enough of the night to charge each shadow with menace. She looked at patches of blackness. Black is blind remembering, she thought. You listen for pack sounds, for the cries of those who hunted your ancestors in a past so ancient only your most primitive cells remember. The ears see, the nostrils see. Presently Paul stood beside her, said, Duncan told me that if he was captured, he could hold out this long. We must leave here now. He shouldered the pack, crossed to the shallow lip of the basin, climbed to a ledge that looked down on open desert. Jessica followed automatically, noting how she now lived in her son's orbit. For now is my grief heavier than the sands of the seas, she thought. This world has emptied me of all but the oldest purpose, tomorrow's life. I live now for my young duke and the daughter yet to be. She felt the sand drag her feet as she climbed to Paul's side. He looked north across a line of rocks, studying a distant escarpment. The faraway rock profile was like an ancient battleship of the seas outlined by stars. The long swish of it lifted on an invisible wave with syllables of boomerang antennae, funnels arching back, a pie-shaped upthrusting at the stern. An orange glare burst above the silhouette and a line of brilliant purple cut downward toward the glare. Another line of purple, and another upthrusting orange glare. It was like an ancient naval battle, remembered shell fire, and the sight held them staring. Pillars of fire, Paul whispered. A ring of red eyes lifted over the distant rock. Lines of purple laced the sky. Jet flares and laser guns, Jessica said. The dust-reddened first moon of Arrakis lifted above the horizon to their left, and they saw a storm trail there, a ribbon of movement over the desert. It must be Harkonnen Thopters hunting us, Paul said. The way they're cutting up the desert. It's as though they were making certain they stamped out whatever's there. The way you'd stamp out a nest of insects. Or a nest of Atreides, Jessica said. We must seek cover, Paul said. We'll head south and keep to the rocks. if they caught us in the open. He turned, adjusting the pack to his shoulders. They're killing anything that moves. He took one step along the ledge and, in that instant, heard the low hiss of gliding aircraft, saw the dark shapes of ornithopters above them.
My father once told me that respect for the truth comes close to being the basis for all morality. Something cannot emerge from nothing, he said. This is profound thinking if you understand how unstable the truth can be. From Conversations with Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
I've always prided myself on seeing things the way they truly are. That's the curse of being a mentat. You can't stop analyzing your data.
The leathered old face of Thulfir Hawat appeared composed in the pre-dawn dimness as he spoke. His sappho-stained lips were drawn into a straight line, with radial creases spreading upward. A robed man squatted silently on sand across from Hawat, apparently unmoved by the words. The two crouched beneath a rock overhang that looked down on a wide, shallow sink. Dawn was spreading over the shattered outline of cliffs across the basin, touching everything with pink. It was cold under the overhang, a dry and penetrating chill left over from the night. There had been a warm wind just before dawn, but now it was cold. Howard could hear teeth chattering behind him among the few troopers remaining in his force. The man squatting across from Howard was a friend who had come across the sink in the first light of false dawn, skittering over the sand, blending into the dunes, his movements barely discernible. The Fremen extended a finger to the sand between them, drew a figure there. It looked like a bow, with an arrow spilling out of it.
There are many Harkonnen patrols.
He lifted his finger, pointed upward across the cliffs that Howard and his men had descended. Howard nodded. Many patrols, yes. But still he did not know what this Fremen wanted, and this rankled. Mentat training was supposed to give a man the power to see motives. This had been the worst night of Howard's life. He had been at Simpo, a garrison village, buffer outpost for the former capital city Carthage, when the reports of attack began arriving. At first he thought, it's a raid. The Harkonnens are tested. But report followed report, faster and faster. 2 legions landed at Carthage, 5 legions, 50 brigades, attacking the Duke's main base at Arakeen, a legion at Arsund, 2 battle groups at Splintered Rock. Then the reports became more detailed. There were Imperial Sardaukar among the attackers, possibly 2 legions of them. And it became clear that the invaders knew precisely which weight of arms to send where. Precisely. Superb intelligence. Howard's shocked fury had mounted until it threatened the smooth functioning of his mentat capabilities. The size of the attack struck his mind like a physical blow. Now, hiding beneath a bit of desert rock, he nodded to himself, pulled his torn and slashed tunic around him as though warding off the cold shadows. The size of the attack. He had always expected their enemy to hire an occasional lighter from the guild for probing raids. That was an ordinary enough gambit in this kind of house-to-house warfare. Lighters landed and took off on Arrakis regularly to transport the spice for House Atreides. Howard had taken precautions against random raids by false spice lighters. For a full attack, they'd expected no more than 10 brigades. But there were more than 2,000 ships down on Arrakis at the last count. Not just lighters, but frigates, scouts, monitors, crushers, troop carriers, dump boxes. More than 100 brigades, 10 legions. The entire spice income of Arrakis for 50 years might just cover the cost of such a venture.
Damn.
It might. I underestimated what the Baron was willing to spend in attacking us, Howard thought. I failed my Duke. Then there was the matter of the traitor. I will live long enough to see her strangled, he thought. I should have killed that Bene Gesserit witch when I had the chance. There was no doubt in his mind who had betrayed them. The Lady Jessica. She fitted all the facts available.
Your man Gurney Halleck and part of his force are safe with our smuggler friends.
Good.
So Gurney will get off this hell planet. We're not all gone. Howard glanced back at the huddle of his men. They had started the night just past with 300 of his finest. Of those, an even 20 remained, and half of them were wounded. Some of them slept now, standing up, leaning against the rock, sprawled on the sand beneath the rock. Their last thopter, the one they'd been using as a ground effect machine to carry their wounded, had given out just before dawn. They had cut it up with laser guns and hidden the pieces, then worked their way down into this hiding place at the edge of the basin. Howard had only a rough idea of their location, some 200 kilometers southeast of Arakim. The main traveled ways between the Shield Wall CH communities were somewhere south of them. The Fremen across from Howard threw back his hood and still-suit cap to reveal sandy hair and beard. The hair was combed straight back from a high, thin forehead. He had the unreadable, total blue eyes of the spice giant. Beard and mustache were stained at one side of the mouth, his hair matted there by pressure of the looping catch tube from his nose plugs. The man removed his plugs, readjusted them. He rubbed at a scar beside his nose.
If you cross the sink here this night, you must not use shields. There is a break in the wall.
He turned on his heels, pointed south.
There. And it is open sand down to the Erg. Shields will attract it. Worm. They don't often come in here, but a shield will bring one every time.
He said worm, Howard thought. He was going to say something else. What? And what does he want of us? Howard sighed. He could not recall ever before being this tired. It was a muscle weariness that energy pills were unable to ease. Those damnable Sardaga. With a self-accusing bitterness, he faced the thought of the soldier fanatics and the imperial treachery they represented. His own meant-out assessment of the data told him how little chance he had ever to present evidence of this treachery before the High Council of the Landsrat, where justice might be done.
Do you wish to go to the smugglers?
Is it possible?
The way is long.
Fremen don't like to say no, Idaho had told him once.
You haven't yet told me whether your people can help my wounded.
They are wounded.
The same damned answer every time.
We know they're wounded. That's not the peace.
Friend, what do your wounded say? Are there those among them who can see the water need of your tribe?
We haven't talked about water.
I can understand your reluctance. They are your friends, your tribesmen. Do you have water?
Not enough.
The Fremen gestured to Howard's tunic, the skin exposed beneath it.
You were caught in CH without your suits. You must make a water decision, friend.
Can we hire your help?
The Fremen shrugged.
You have no water.
He glanced at the group behind Howard.
How many of your wounded would you send?
Howard fell silent, staring at the man. He could see as a mentat that their communication was out of phase. Word sounds were not being linked up here in the normal manner.
I am Thufir Howard. I can speak for my duke. I will make promissory commitment now for your help. I wish a limited form of help, preserving my force long enough only to kill a traitor who thinks herself beyond vengeance.
You wish our signing in a vendetta?
The vendetta I'll handle myself. I wish to be freed of responsibility for my wounded, that I may get about it.
The Fremen scowled.
How can you be responsible for your wounded? They are their own responsibility. The water's at issue, Thufir Howard. Would you have me take that decision away from you?
The man put a hand to a weapon concealed beneath his robe. Howard tensed, wondering, is there betrayal here?
What do you fear?
These people and their disconcerting directness. Howard spoke cautiously.
There's a price on my head.
The Fremen removed his hand from his weapon.
You think we have the Byzantine corruption. You don't know us. The Harkonnens have not water enough to buy the smallest child among us.
But they had the price of guild passage for more than 2,000 fighting ships, Howard thought. The size of that price still staggered him.
We both fight Harkonnens. Should we not share the problems and ways of meeting the battle issue?
We are sharing. I have seen you fight Harkonnens. You are good. There have been times I'd have appreciated your arm beside me.
Say where my arm may help you.
Who knows? There are Harkonnen forces everywhere. But you still have not made the water decision or put it to your wounded.
I must be cautious, Howard told himself. There's a thing here that's not understood.
Will you show me your way? The Arakeen way.
Stranger thinking.
There was a sneer in the Fremen's tone. He pointed to the northwest, across the cliff top.
We watched you come across the sand last night. You keep your force on the split face of the dunes. That. You have no still suits, no water. You will not last long.
The ways of Arrakis don't come easily.
Truth. But we've killed the Harkonnens.
What do you do with your own wounded?
Does a man know when he is worth saving? You're wounded? No, you have no water.
He tilted his head, looking sideways up at Howard.
This is clearly a time for water decision. Both wounded and unwounded must look to the tribe's future.
The tribe's future, Howard thought. The tribe of Atreides. There's sense in that. He forced himself to the question he had been avoiding.
Have you word of my duke or his son?
Unreadable blue eyes stared upward into Howard's.
Word.
Their fate.
Fate is the same for everyone. Your duke, it is said, has met his fate. As to the Lisan al-Gaib, his son, that is in Liet's hands. Liet has not said.
I knew the answer without asking, Howard thought. He glanced back at his men.
Okay, make sure we're
They were all awake.
on screen.
They had heard. They were staring out across the sand. The
Damn, my leg is going to
realization in
sleep
their
again.
expressions,
What is going
there was
on?
no returning to Caladan for them. And now, Arrakis was lost. Howard turned back to the Fremen.
Have you heard of Duncan, Idaho?
He was in the great house when the shield went down. This I've heard. No more.
She dropped the shield and let in the Harkonnens, he thought. I was the one who sat with my back to a door. How could she do this when it meant turning also against her own son? But who knows how a Bene Gesserit witch thinks, if you can call it thinking. Howard tried to swallow in a dry throat.
When will you hear about the boy?
We know little of what happens in Arakeen. Who knows?
You have ways of finding out.
Perhaps.
The Fremen rubbed at the scar beside his nose.
Tell me, Thufir Howard, do you have knowledge of the big weapons the Harkonnens used?
The artillery, Howard thought busily. Who could have guessed they'd use artillery in this day of shields?
You refer to the artillery they used to trap our people in the caves. I've theoretical knowledge of such explosive weapons.
Any man who retreats into a cave which has only one opening deserves to die.
Why do you ask about these weapons?
Liet wishes it.
Is that what he wants from us? Howard wondered.
Did you come here seeking information about the big guns?
Liet wished to see one of the weapons for himself.
Then you should just go take one.
Yes, we took one. We have it hidden where Stilgar can study it for Liet, and where Liet can see it for himself if he wishes. But I doubt he'll want to. The weapon is not a very good one. Poor design for Arrakis.
You took one.
It was a good fight. We lost only 2 men and spilled the water for more than 100 of theirs.
There was Sardaukar at every gun, Howard thought. This desert madman speaks casually of losing only 2 men against Sardaukar.
We would not have lost the 2 except for those others fighting beside the Harkonnens. Some of those are good fighters.
One of Howard's men limped forward, looking down at the squatting Fremen.
Are you talking about Sardaukar?
He's talking about Sardaukar.
Sardaukar? Ah, so that's what they are. This was a good night indeed. Sardaukar. Which legion? Do you know?
We don't know.
Sardaukar. Yet they wear Harkonnen clothing. Is that not strange?
The Emperor does not wish it known he fights against a great house.
But you know they are Sardaukar.
Who am I?
You are Thufir Hound. Well, we would have learned it in time. We've sent 3 of them captive to be questioned by Liet's men.
You captured Sardaukar?
Only 3 of them. They fought well.
If only we had the time to link up with these Fremen, Howard thought. It was a sour lament in his mind. If only we could have trained them and armed them. Great mother, what a fighting force we'd have had.
Perhaps you delay because of worry over the Lisan al-Gaib. If he is truly the Lisan al-Gaib, harm cannot touch him. Do not spend thoughts on a matter which has not been proved.
I serve the Lisan al-Gaib. His welfare is my concern. I've pledged myself to this.
You are pledged to his water?
Howard glanced at his aide, who was still staring at the Fremen, returned his attention to the squatting figure.
To his water, yes.
You wish to return to Erkin, to the place of his water?
Yes, to the place of his water.
Why did you not say at first it was a water matter?
The Fremen stood up, seated his nose.
He's like, oh.
Howard motioned with his head for his aide to
Oh,
return
that's
to
so
the
funny.
With a tired shrug, the man obeyed. Howard heard a low-voiced conversation arise among the men.
There is always a way to water.
Behind Howard, a man cursed. Howard's aide called him.
Thufir! Arky just died.
The Fremen put a fist to his ear.
The bond of water. It's a sign.
He stared at Howard.
We have a place nearby for accepting the water. Shall I call my men?
The aide returned to Howard's side.
Thufir, a couple of the men left wives in Erkin. They're, well, you know how it is at a time like this.
The Fremen still held his fist to his ear.
Is it the bond of water, Thufir Howard?
Howard's mind was racing. He sensed now the direction of the Fremen's words, but feared the reaction of the tired men under the rock overhang when they understood it.
Yeah, man. Try and get into action.
Of water. Let our tribes be joined.
The Fremen lowered his fist. As though that were the signal, 4 men slid and dropped down from the rocks above them. They darted back under the overhang, rolled the dead man in the loose robe, lifted him, and began running with him along the cliff wall to the right. Spurts of dust lifted around their running feet. It was over before Howard's tired men could gather their wits. The group, with the body hanging like a sack in its enfolding robe, was gone around a turn in the cliff.
Where are they going with Arky? He was...
They're taking him to bury him.
Fremen don't bury their dead. Would you try any tricks on us, Thufir? We know what they do. Arky was one of...
Paradise was sure for a man who died in the service of Lisan al-Gaib. If it is the Lisan al-Gaib you serve, as you have said it, why raise mourning cries? The memory of one who died in this fashion will live as long as the memory of man endures.
But Howard's men advanced, angry looks on their faces. One had captured a laser gun. He started to draw it.
Stop right where you are.
Howard fought down the sick fatigue that gripped his muscles.
These people respect our dead. Customs differ, but the meaning's the same.
They're going to render Arky down for his water.
Is it that your men wish to attend the ceremony?
He doesn't even see the problem, Howard thought. The naivety of the Fremen was frightening.
They're concerned for a respected comrade.
We will treat your comrade with the same reverence we treat our own. This is the bond of water. We know the rights. A man's flesh is his own. The water belongs to the tribe.
Howard spoke quickly as the man with the laser gun advanced another step.
Will you now help our wounded?
One does not question the bond. We will do for you what a tribe does for its own. First, we must get all of you suited and see to the necessities.
The man with the laser gun hesitated. Howard's aide spoke.
Are we buying help with Arky's water?
Not buying. We've joined these people. Customs differ.
Howard began to relax.
And they'll help us get to Arky?
We will kill Hawkins and Sarkar.
The Fremen grinned. He stepped backward, cupped his hands beside his ears, and tipped his head back, listening. Presently, he lowered his hands.
An aircraft comes. Conceal yourselves beneath the rock and remain motionless.
At a gesture from Howard, his men obeyed. The Fremen took Howard's arm, pressed him back with the others.
We will fight in the time of fighting.
He reached beneath his robes, brought out a small cage, lifted a creature from it. Howard recognized a tiny bat. The bat turned its head, and Howard saw its blue within blue eyes. The Fremen stroked the bat, soothing it, crooning to it. He bent over the animal's head, allowed a drop of saliva to fall from his tongue into the bat's upturned mouth. The bat stretched its wings, but remained on the Fremen's opened hand. The man took a tiny tube, held it beside the bat's head, and chattered into the tube. Then, lifting the creature high, he threw it upward. The bat swooped away beside the cliff and was lost to sight. The Fremen folded the cage, thrust it beneath his robe. Again he bent his head, listening.
They quarter the high country. One wonders who they seek up there.
It's known that we retreated in this direction.
One should never presume one is the sole object of a hunt. Watch the other side of the basin. You will see a thing.
Time passed. Some of Howard's men stirred, whispering.
Remain silent as frightened animals,
The Fremen hissed. Howard discerned movement near the opposite cliff, flitting blurs of tan on tan.
My little friend carried his message,
The Fremen said.
He is a good messenger day or night. I'll be unhappy to lose that one.
The movement across the sink faded away. On the entire 4 to 5 kilometer expanse of sand, nothing remained but the growing pressure of the day's heat, blurred columns of rising air.
Be most silent now,
The Fremen whispered. A pile of plodding figures emerged from a break in the opposite cliff, headed directly across the sink. To Howard, they appeared to be Fremen, but a curiously inept band. He counted 6 men making heavy going of it over the dunes. A thwack-thwack of ornithopter wings sounded high to the right, behind Howard's group. The craft came over the cliff wall above them. An Atreides thopter with Harkonnen battle colours splashed on it. The thopter swooped toward the men crossing the sink. The group there stopped on a dune crest, waved. The thopter circled once over them in a tight curve, came back for a dust-shrouded landing in front of the Fremen. 5 men swarmed from the thopter, and Howard saw the dust-repellent shimmering of shields, and in their motions the hard competence of Sardaukar.
Aye, they use their stupid shields,
The Fremen beside Howard hissed. He glanced toward the open south wall of the sink.
They are Sardaukar.
Howard whispered.
Good.
The Sardaukar approached the waiting group of Fremen in an enclosing half-circle. Sun glinted on blades held ready. The Fremen stood in a compact group, apparently indifferent. Abruptly, the sand around the 2 groups sprouted Fremen. They were at the ornithopter, then in it. Where the 2 groups had met at the dune crest, a dust cloud partly obscured violent motion. Presently, dust settled. Only Fremen remained standing.
They left only 3 men in their thopter,
The Fremen beside Howard said.
That was fortunate. I don't believe we had to damage the craft in taking it.
Behind Howard, one of his men whispered,
Those were Sardaukar. Did you notice how well they fought?
the Fremen asked. Howard took a deep breath. He smelled the burned dust around him, felt the heat, the dryness. In a voice to match that dryness, he said, "Yes, they fought well indeed." The captured Thopter took off with a lurching flap of wings, angled upward to the south in a steep, wing-tucked climb. So these Fremen can handle Thopters too, Howard thought. On the distant dune, a Fremen waved a square of green cloth. Once. Twice. "More come," the Fremen beside Howard barked. "Be ready. I'd hoped to have us away without more inconvenience." Inconvenience, Howard thought. He saw two more Thopters swooping from high in the west onto an area of sand suddenly devoid of visible Fremen. Only 8 splotches of blue, the bodies of the Sardaukar in Harkonnen uniforms, remained at the scene of violence. Another Thopter glided in over the cliff wall above Howard. He drew in a sharp breath as he saw it, a big troop carrier. It flew with the slow, spread wing heaviness of a full load, like a giant bird coming to its nest. In the distance, the purple finger of a lasgun beam flicked from one of the diving Thopters. It laced across the sand, raising a sharp trail of dust. "The cowards!" the Fremen beside Howard rasped.
Sorry.
The troop carrier settled toward the patch of blue-clad bodies. Its wings crept out to full reach, began the cupping action of a quick stop. Howard's attention was caught by a flash of sun on metal to the south. A Thopter plummeting there in a power dive, wings pulled it flat against its sides, its jets a golden flare against the dark silvered grey of the sky. It plunged like an arrow toward the troop carrier, which was unshielded because of the lasgun activity around it. Straight into the carrier, the diving Thopter plunged. A flaming roar shook the basin. Rocks tumbled from the cliff walls all around. A geyser of red-orange shot skyward from the sand where the carrier and its companion Thopters had been. Everything there caught in the flame. It was a Fremen who took off in that captured Thopter, Howard thought. He deliberately sacrificed himself to get that carrier. Great mother, what are these Fremen? "A reasonable exchange," said the Fremen beside Howard. "There must have been 300 men in that carrier. Now, we must see
God damn.
and make plans to get another aircraft." He started to step out of their rock-shadowed concealment. A rain of blue uniforms came over the cliff wall in front of him, falling in low suspense of slowness. In a flashing instant, Howard had time to see that they were Sardaukar. Hard faces set in battle frenzy, that they were unshielded and each carried a knife in one hand, a stunner in the other. A thrown knife caught Howard's Fremen companion in the throat, hurling him backward, twisting face down. Howard had only time to draw his own knife before blackness of a stunner projectile felled him.
Muad'Dib could indeed see the future, but you must understand the limits of this power. Think of sight. You have eyes, yet cannot see without light. If you are on the floor of a valley, you cannot see beyond your valley. Just so, Muad'Dib could not always choose to look across the mysterious terrain. He tells us that a single obscure decision of prophecy, perhaps the choice of one word over another, could change the entire aspect of the future. He tells us the vision of time is broad, but when you pass through it, time becomes a narrow door. And always, he fought the temptation to choose a clear, safe course, warning, that path leads ever down into stagnation. From Arrakis Awakening by the Princess Irulan.
Stagnation. No,
As
Paul
the
don't like that
ornithopters
shit.
glided out of the night above them, Paul grabbed his mother's arm, snapped, "Don't move." Then he saw the lead craft in the moonlight, the way its wings cut to brake for landing, the reckless dash of the hands at the controls. "It's Idaho," he breathed. The craft and its companions settled into the basin like a covey of birds coming to nest. Idaho was out of his Thopter and running toward them before the dust settled. 2 figures in Fremen robes followed him. Paul recognized one, the tall, sandy-bearded Kynes. "This way?" Kynes called, and he veered left. Behind Kynes, other Fremen were throwing fabric covers over their ornithopters. The craft became a row of shallow dunes. Idaho skidded to a stop in front of Paul, saluted. "My lord, the Fremen have a temporary hiding place nearby where we... What about that, back there?" Paul pointed to the violence above the distant cliff, the jet flares, the purple beams of laser guns lacing the desert. A rare smile touched Idaho's round, placid face. "My lord, sire, I've left them a little, sir." Glaring white light filled the desert, bright as a sun, etching their shadows onto the rock floor of the ledge. In one sweeping motion, Idaho had Paul's arm in one hand, Jessica's shoulder in the other, hurling them down off the ledge into the basin. They sprawled together in the sand as the roar of an explosion thundered over them. Its shockwave tumbled chips off the rock ledge they had vacated. Idaho sat up, brushed sand from himself. "Not the family atomics," Jessica said. "I thought—" "You planted a shield back there," Paul said. "A big one. Turned to full force," Idaho said. "A lasgun beam touched it and..." He shrugged. "Subatomic fusion," Jessica said. "That's a dangerous weapon." "Not weapon, milady. Defense. That scum will think twice before using laser guns another time." The Fremen from the ornithopters stopped above them. One called in a low voice, "We should get under cover, friends." Paul got to his feet as Idaho helped Jessica up. "That blast will attract considerable attention, sire," Idaho said. Sire, Paul thought. The word had such a strange sound when directed at him. Sire had always been his father. He felt himself touched briefly by his powers of prescience, seeing himself infected by the wild race consciousness that was moving the human universe toward chaos. The vision left him shaken, and he allowed Idaho to guide him along the edge of the basin to a rock projection. Fremen there were opening a way down into the sand with their compaction tools. "May I take your pack, sire?" Idaho asked. "It's not heavy, Duncan," Paul said. "You have no body shield," Idaho said. "Do you wish mine?" He glanced at the distant cliff. "Not likely there'll be any more laser gun activity about." "Keep your shield, Duncan. Your right arm is shield enough for me." Jessica saw the way the praise took effect, how Idaho moved closer to Paul, and she thought, "Such a sure hand my son has with his people." The Fremen removed a rock plug that opened a passage down into the native basement complex of the desert. A camouflage cover was rigged for the opening. "This way," one of the Fremen said, and he led them down rock steps into darkness. Behind them, the cover blotted out the moonlight. A dim green glow came alive ahead, revealing the steps and rock walls, a turn to the left. Robed Fremen were all around them now, pressing downward. They rounded the corner, found another down-slanting passage. It opened into a rough cave chamber. Kynes stood before them, jabber hood thrown back, the neck of his stillsuit glistening in the green light. His long hair and beard were mussed, the blue eyes without whites were a darkness under heavy brows. In the moment of encounter, Kynes wondered at himself. Why am I helping these people? It's the most dangerous thing I've ever done. It could doom me with them. Then he looked squarely at Paul, seeing the boy who had taken on the mantle of manhood, masking grief, suppressing all except the position that now must be assumed, the dukedom. And Kynes realized in that moment the dukedom still existed, and solely because of this youth. And this was not a thing to be taken lightly. Jessica glanced once around the chamber, registering it on her senses in the Bene Gesserit way, a laboratory, a civil place full of angles and squares in the ancient manner. "This is one of the Imperial ecological testing stations my father wanted as advanced bases," Paul said. His father wanted, Kynes thought. And again Kynes wondered at himself. Am I foolish to aid these fugitives? Why am I doing it? It would be so easy to take them now, to buy the Harkonnen trust with them. Paul followed his mother's example, gestalting the room, seeing the workbench down one side, the walls of featureless rock. Instruments lined the bench, dials glowing, wire gridex planes with fluting glass emerging from them. An ozone smell permeated the place. Some of the Fremen moved on around a concealing angle in the chamber, and new sounds started there. Machine coughs, the whinnies of spinning belts and multi-drives. Paul looked to the end of the room, saw cages with small animals in them stacked against the wall. "You've recognized this place correctly," Kynes said. "For what would you use such a place, Paul Atreides?" "To make this planet a fit place for humans," Paul said. "Perhaps that's why I helped them," Kynes thought. The machine sounds abruptly hummed away to silence. Into this void there came a thin animal squeak from the cages. It was cut off abruptly, as though in embarrassment. Paul returned his attention to the cages, saw that the animals were brown-winged bats. An automatic feeder extended from the side wall across the cages. A Fremen emerged from the hidden area of the chamber, spoke to Kynes. "Liet, the field generator equipment is not working. I am unable to mask us from proximity detectors." "Can you repair it?" Kynes asked. "Not quickly. The parts," the man shrugged. "Yes," Kynes said. "Then we'll do without machinery. Get a hand pump for air out to the surface." "Immediately," the man hurried away. Kynes turned back to Paul. "You gave a good answer." Jessica marked the easy rumble of the man's voice. It was a royal voice accustomed to command, and she had not missed the reference to him as Liet. Liet.
I was about to say, did they find out who Liet was yet?
Of the tame planetologist. "We are most grateful for your help, Dr. Kynes," she said. "Mm-hmm. We'll see," Kynes said. He nodded to one of his men. "Spice coffee in my quarters, Shamir?" "At once, Liet," the man said. Kynes indicated an arched opening in the side wall of the chamber. "If you please." Jessica allowed herself a regal nod before accepting. She saw Paul give a hand signal to Idaho, telling him to mount guard here. The passage, 2 paces deep, opened through a heavy door into a square office lighted by golden glow globes. Jessica passed her hand across the door as she entered, was startled to identify Plasty. Paul stepped 3 paces into the room, dropped his pack to the floor. He heard the door close behind him, studied the place. About 8 meters to a side, walls of natural rock, curry-colored, broken by metal filing cabinets on their right. A low desk with milk glass top shot full of yellow bubbles occupied the room's center. 4 suspensor chairs ringed the desk. Kynes moved around Paul, held a chair for Jessica. She sat down, noting the way her son examined the room. Paul remained standing for another eye blink. A faint anomaly in the room's air currents told him there was a secret exit to their right, behind the filing cabinets. "Will you sit down, Paul Atreides?" Kynes asked. How carefully he avoids my title, Paul thought. But he accepted the chair, remained silent while Kynes sat down. "You sense that Arrakis could be a paradise," Kynes said. "Yet as you see, the Imperium sends here only its trained hatchet men, its seekers after the spice." Paul held up his thumb with its ducal signet. "Do you see this ring?" "Yes." "Do you know its significance?" Jessica turned sharply to stare at her son. "Your father lies dead in the ruins of Arrakeen," Kynes said. "You are technically the Duke." "I'm a soldier of the Imperium," Paul said. "Technically, a hatchet man." Kynes' face darkened. "Even with the Emperor's Sardaukar standing over your father's body?" "The Sardaukar are one thing. The legal source of my authority is another," Paul said. "Arrakis has its own way of determining who wears the mantle of authority," Kynes said. And Jessica, turning back to look at him, thought, "There's steel in this man that no one has taken the temper out of. And we've need of steel. Paul's doing a dangerous thing." Paul said, the Sardaukar on Arrakis are a measure of how much our beloved Emperor feared my father. Now I will give the Padishah Emperor reasons to fear the... Lad, Kynes said, there are things you don't... You will address me as sire or my lord, Paul said. Gently, Jessica thought. Kynes stared at Paul, and Jessica noted the glint of admiration in the planetologist's face, the touch of humour there. Sire, Kynes said. I am an embarrassment to the Emperor, Paul said. I am an embarrassment to all who would divide Arrakis as their spoil. As I live, I shall continue to be such an embarrassment that I stick in their throats and choke them to death. Words, Kynes said. Paul stared at him. Presently, Paul said, You have a legend of the Lisan al-Gaib here, the voice from the outer world, the one who will lead the Fremen to paradise. Your men have superstition, Kynes said. Perhaps, Paul agreed, yet perhaps not. Superstitions sometimes have strange roots and stranger branchings. You have a plan, Kynes said. This much is obvious, sire. Could your Fremen provide me with proof positive that the Sardaukar are here in Harkonnen uniform? Quite likely. The Emperor will put a Harkonnen back in power here, Paul said. Perhaps even Beast Raban. Let him. Once he has involved himself beyond escaping his guilt, let the Emperor face the possibility of a bill of particulars laid before the Landsraad. Let him answer there where... Paul, Jessica said. Granted that the Landsraad High Council accepts your case, Kynes said, there could be only one outcome. The general warfare between the Imperium and the great houses. Chaos, Jessica said. But I present my case to the Emperor, Paul said, and give him an alternative to chaos. Jessica spoke in a dry tone. Blackmail? One of the tools of statecraft, as you've said yourself, Paul said, and Jessica heard the bitterness in his voice. The Emperor has no sons, only daughters. You'd aim for the throne? Jessica asked. The Emperor will not risk having the Imperium shattered by total war, Paul said. Planets blasted, disorder everywhere. He'll not risk that. This is a desperate gamble you propose, Kynes said. What do the great houses of the Landsraad fear most? Paul asked. They fear most what is happening here right now on Arrakis, the Sardaukar picking them off one by one. That's why there is a Landsraad. This is the glue of the Great Convention. Only in union do they match the Imperial forces. But there, this is what they fear, Paul said. Arrakis would become a rallying cry. Each of them would see himself in my father, cut out of the herd and killed. Kynes spoke to Jessica. Would his plan work? I'm no mentor, Jessica said. But you are Bene Gesserit. She shot a probing stare at him, said, His plan has good points and bad points, as any plan would at this stage. A plan depends as much upon execution as it does upon concept. Law is the ultimate science, Paul quoted. Thus it reads above the Emperor's door. I propose to show him law. And I'm not sure I could trust the person who conceived this plan, Kynes said. Arrakis has its own plan that we... From the throne, Paul said. I could make a paradise of Arrakis with a wave of a hand. This is the coin I offer for your support. Kynes
Straight up.
My loyalty is not for sale, sire. Paul stared across the desk at him, meeting the cold glare of those blue within blue eyes, studying the bearded face, the commanding appearance. A harsh smile touched Paul's lips, and he said, Well spoken. I apologize. Kynes met Paul's stare, and presently said, No Harkonnen ever admitted error. Perhaps you're not like them, Atreides. It could be a fault in their education, Paul said. You say you're not for sale, but I believe I've the coin you'll accept. For your loyalty, I offer my loyalty to you. Totally. My son has the Atreides sincerity, Jessica thought. He has that tremendous, almost naive honor. And what a powerful force that truly is. She saw that Paul's words had shaken Kynes. This is nonsense, Kynes said. You're just a boy, and I'm the Duke, Paul said. I'm an Atreides. No Atreides has ever broken such a bond. Kynes swallowed. When I say totally, Paul said, I mean without reservation. I would give my life for you. Sire, Kynes said, and the word was torn from him. But Jessica saw that he was not now speaking to a boy of 15, but to a man, to a superior. Now, Kynes meant the word. In this moment, he'd give his life for Paul, she thought. How do the Atreides accomplish this thing so quickly, so easily? I know you mean this, Kynes said. Yet the Harken... The door behind Paul slammed open. He whirled to see reeling violence, shouting, the clash of steel, wax-image faces grimacing in the passage. With his mother beside him, Paul leaped for the door, seeing Idaho blocking the passage, his blood-pitted eyes there visible through a shield blur, claw hands beyond him, arcs of steel chopping futilely at the shield. There was the orange firemouth of a stunner repelled by the shield. Idaho's blades were through it all, flick-flicking, red dripping from them. Then Kynes was beside Paul, and they threw their weight against the door. Paul had one last glimpse of Idaho standing against a swarm of Harkonnen uniforms, his jerking, controlled staggers, the black goat hair with a red blossom of death in it. Then the door was closed, and there came a snick as Kynes threw the bolts. I appear to have decided, Kynes said. Someone detected your machinery before it was shut down, Paul said. He pulled his mother away from the door, met the despair in her eyes.
Yeah, don't tell me that's how Duncan
Duncan
goes.
Kynes said. You've a bolt hole out of here, Paul said. Shall we use it? Kynes took a deep breath, said, This door should hold for at least 20 minutes, against all but a laser gun. They'll not use a laser gun for fear we've shields on this side, Paul said. Those were Sardaukar in Harkonnen uniform, Jessica whispered. They could hear pounding on the door now, rhythmic blows. Kynes indicated the cabinets against the right-hand wall, said, This way. He crossed to the first cabinet, opened a drawer, manipulated a handle within it. The entire wall of cabinets swung open to expose the black mouth of a tunnel. This door also is plastine, Kynes said. You were well prepared, Jessica said. We lived under the Harkonnens for 80 years, Kynes said. He herded them into the darkness, closed the door. In the sudden blackness, Jessica saw a luminous arrow on the floor ahead of her. Kynes' voice came from behind them. We'll separate here. This wall is tougher. It'll stand for at least an hour. Follow the arrows like that one on the floor. They'll be extinguished by your passage. They lead through a maze to another exit where I've secreted a thopter. There's a storm across the desert tonight. Your only hope is to run for that storm, dive into the top of it, ride with it. My people have done this in stealing thopters. If you stay high in the storm, you'll survive. What of you? Paul asked. I'll try to escape another way. If I'm captured, well, I'm still Imperial Planetologist. I can say I was your captive. Running like cowards, Paul thought. But how else can I live to avenge my father? He turned to face the door. Jessica heard him move, said, Duncan's dead, Paul. You saw the wound. You can do nothing for him. I'll take full payment for them all one day, Paul said. Not
Damn.
unless you hurry now,
That's how Duncan
Kynes
goes? Just like
Paul
that?
felt the man's hand on his shoulder. Where will we meet, Kynes? Paul asked. I'll send Fremen searching for you. The storm's path is known. Hurry now, and the Great Mother give you speed and luck. They heard him go, a scrambling in the blackness. Jessica found Paul's hand, pulled him gently. We must not get separated, she said. Yes. He followed her across the first arrow, seeing it go black as they touched it. Another arrow beckoned ahead. They crossed it, saw it extinguish itself, saw another arrow ahead. They were running now. Plans within plans, within plans within plans, Jessica thought. Have we become part of someone else's plan now? The arrows led them around turnings, past side openings only dimly sensed in the faint luminescence. Their way slanted downward for a time, then up, ever up. They came finally to steps, rounded a corner and were brought short by a glowing wall with a dark handle visible in its center. Paul pressed the handle. The wall swung away from them. Light flared to reveal a rock-hewn cavern with an ornithopter squatting in its center. A flat grey wall with a door sign on it loomed beyond the aircraft. Where did Kynes go? Jessica asked. He did what any good guerrilla leader would, Paul said. He separated us into two parties and arranged that he couldn't reveal where we are if he's captured. He won't really know. Paul drew her into the room, noting how their feet kicked up dust on the floor. No one's been here for a long time, he said. He seemed confident that Fremen could find us, she said. I share that confidence. Paul released her hand, crossed to the ornithopter's left door, opened it and secured his pack in the rear. This ship's proximity must, he said. Instrument panel has remote door control, light control. 80 years under the Harkonnens taught them to be thorough. Jessica leaned against the craft's other side, catching her breath. The Harkonnens will have a covering force over this area, she said. They're not stupid. She considered her direction sense, pointed right. The storm we saw is that way. Paul nodded, fighting an abrupt reluctance to move. He knew its cause, but found no help in the knowledge. Somewhere this night he had passed a decision nexus into the deep unknown. He knew the time area surrounding them, but the here and now existed as a place of mystery. It was as though he had seen himself from a distance go out of sight down into a valley. Of the countless paths up out of that valley, some might carry a Paul Atreides back into sight, but many would not. The longer we wait, the better prepared they'll be, Jessica said. Get in and strap yourself down, he said. He joined her in the ornithopter, still wrestling with the thought that this was blind ground, unseen in any prescient vision. And he realized with an abrupt sense of shock that he had been giving more and more reliance to prescient memory, and it had weakened him for this particular emergency. If you rely only on your eyes, your other senses weaken. It was a Bene Gesserit axiom. He took it to himself now, promising never again to fall into that trap, if he lived through this. Paul fastened his safety harness, saw that his mother was secure, checked the aircraft. The wings were at full spread rest, their delicate metal interleavings extended. He touched the retractor bar, watched the wings shorten for jet boost takeoff, the way Gurney Halleck had taught him. The starter switch moved easily. Dials on the instrument panel came alive as the jet pods were armed. Turbines began their low hissing. Ready? He asked. Yes. He touched the remote control for lights. Darkness blanketed them. His hand was a shadow against the luminous dials as he tripped the remote door control. Grating sounded ahead of them. A cascade of sand swished away to silence. A dusty breeze touched Paul's cheeks. He closed his door, feeling the sudden pressure. A wide patch of dust-blurred stars framed in angular darkness appeared where the door wall had been. Starlight defined a shelf beyond, a suggestion of sand ripples. Paul depressed the glowing action sequence switch on his panel. The wings snapped back and down, hurling the thopter out of its nest. Power surged from the jet pods as the wings locked into lift attitude. Jessica let her hands ride lightly on the dual controls, feeling the sureness of her son's movements. She was frightened, yet exhilarated. Now, Paul's training is our only hope, she thought. His youth and swiftness. Paul fed more power to the jet pods. The thopter banked, sinking them into their seats as a dark wall lifted against the stars ahead. He gave the craft more wing, more power. Another burst of lifting wing beats, and they came out over rocks, silver-frosted angles and outcroppings in the starlight. The dust-reddened second moon showed itself above the horizon to their right, defining the ribbon trail of the storm.
God damn. No Chani yet, huh?
Paul's hands danced over the controls. Wings snipped into beetle stubs. G-force pulled at their flesh as the craft came around in a tight bank.
Jet flares behind us.
Jessica said. I saw them. He slammed the power arm forward. Their Thopter leaped like a frightened animal, surged southwest toward the storm and the great curve of desert. In the near distance, Paul saw scattered shadows telling where the line of rocks ended, the basement complex sinking beneath the dunes. Beyond stretched moonlit fingernail shadows, dunes diminishing one into another. And above the horizon climbed the flat immensity of the storm like a wall against the stars. Something jarred the Thopter.
Shell burst,
Jessica gasped.
they're using some kind of projectile weapon.
She saw a sudden animal grin on Paul's face.
They seem to be avoiding their las guns,
He said.
but we've no shields.
Do they know that? Again the Thopter shuddered. Paul twisted to peer back. Only one of them appears to be fast enough to keep up with us. He returned his attention to their course, watching the storm wall grow high in front of them. It loomed like a tangible solid.
Projectile launchers, rockets, or the ancient weaponry. That's one thing we'll give the front,
Paul whispered.
The storm,
Jessica said.
hadn't you better turn?
What about the ship behind us?
He's pulling up.
Now. Paul stubbed the wings, banked hard left into the deceptively slow boiling of the storm wall, felt his cheeks pull in the G-force. They appeared to glide into a slow clouding of dust that grew heavier and heavier until it blotted out the desert and the moon. The aircraft became a long, horizontal whisper of darkness, lighted only by the green luminosity of the instrument panel. Through Jessica's mind flashed all the warnings about such storms, that they cut metal like butter, etched flesh to bone and ate away the bones. She felt the buffeting of dust-blanketed wind. It twisted them as Paul forked the controls. She saw him chop the power, felt the ship buck. The metal around them hissed and trembled.
Sand!
Jessica shouted. She saw the negative shake of his head in the light from the panel. Not much sand this high, but she could feel them sinking deeper into the maelstrom. Paul sent the wings to their full, soaring length, heard them creak with the strain. He kept his eyes fixed on the instruments, gliding by instinct, fighting for altitude. The sound of their passage diminished. The Thopter began rolling off to the left. Paul focused on the glowing globe within the attitude curve, fought his craft back to level flight. Jessica had the eerie feeling that they were standing still, that all motion was external. A vague tan flowing against the windows, a rumbling hiss reminded her of the powers around them.
Winds to 700 or 800 kilometers an hour,
She thought. Adrenaline edginess gnawed at her.
I must not fear.
She told herself, mouthing the words of the Bene Gesserit litany.
Fear is the mind killer.
Yeah.
Slowly her long years of training prevailed. Calmness returned.
We have the tiger by the tail,
Paul whispered.
we can't go down, can't land. I don't think I can lift us out of this. We'll have to ride it out.
Calmness drained out of her. Jessica felt her teeth chattering, clamped them together. Then she heard Paul's voice, low and controlled, reciting the litany.
Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past me, I will turn to see fear's path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain.
What do you despise? By this you are truly known. From Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
They're dead, Baron. Both the woman and the boy are certainly dead.
The Baron Vladimir Harkonnen sat up in the sleep suspensors of his private quarters. Beyond these quarters, and enclosing him like a multi-shelled egg, stretched the space frigate he had grounded on Arrakis. Here in his quarters, though, the ship's harsh metal was disguised with draperies, with fabric paddings and rare art objects.
It is a certainty. They are dead.
The Baron shifted his gross body in the suspensors, focused his attention on an Ebeline statue of a leaping boy in a niche across the room. Sleep faded from him. He straightened the padded suspensor beneath the fat folds of his neck, stared across the single glow globe of his bedchamber to the doorway where Captain Nefud stood blocked by the pentashield.
They're certainly dead, Baron.
The Baron noted the trace of Semuta dullness in Nefud's eyes. It was obvious the man had been deep within the drug's rapture when he received this report, and had stopped only to take the antidote before rushing here.
I have a full report.
Let him sweat a little, the Baron thought. One must always keep the tools of statecraft sharp and ready. Power and fear, sharp and ready.
Have you seen their bodies? Well?
My lord, they were seen to dive into a sandstorm. Winds over 800 kilometers. Nothing survived such a storm, my lord. Nothing. One of our own craft was destroyed in the pursuit.
The Baron stared at Nefud, noting the nervous twitch in the scissors line of the man's jaw muscles, the way the chin moved as Nefud swallowed.
You have seen the bodies?
My lord,
For what purpose do you come here rattling your armor? To tell me a thing is certain when it is
Rattling
not?
your armor.
Do you think I'll praise you for such stupidity? Give you another promotion?
Nefud's face went bone pale. Look at that chicken, the Baron thought. I'm surrounded by such useless clods.
Now, is that the guy that he gave the promotion to when everyone else died from the poison gas?
The man Idaho led us to them then?
yes, my lord.
Look how he blurts out his answer, the Baron thought.
They were attempting to flee to the Fremen, eh?
Yes, my lord.
Is there more to this report?
The Imperial planetologist, Kynes, is involved, my lord. Idaho joined this Kynes under mysterious circumstances. I might even say suspicious circumstances.
So?
They, fled together to a place in the desert where it's apparent the boy and his mother were hiding. In the excitement of the chase, several of our groups were caught in a laser gun shield explosion.
How many did we lose?
I'm, not sure yet, my lord.
He's lying, the Baron thought. It must have been pretty bad.
The Imperial lackey, disguised. He was playing a double game, huh?
I'd stake my reputation on it, Lord.
His reputation, the Baron thought.
Bitch, you ain't got no reputation.
My lord, Kynes is the Imperial planetologist, His Majesty's own servant.
Make it look like an accident, then.
My lord, there was Sardaukar with our forces in the subjugation of this Fremen nest. They have Kynes in custody now.
Get him away from them. Say I wish to question him.
If they demur,
They will not if you handle it correctly.
yes, my lord.
The man must die. He tried to help my enemies.
Nefud shifted from one foot to the other.
Well,
My lord, the Sardaukar have two persons in custody who might be of interest to you. They've got the Duke's Master of Assassins.
Hawat? Thufir Hawat?
I've seen the captive myself, my lord. 'Tis Hawat.
I'd not have believed it possible.
They say he was knocked out by a stunner, my lord. In the desert where he couldn't use his shield, he's virtually unharmed. If we can get our hands on him, he'll provide great sport.
This is a mentat you speak of. One doesn't waste a mentat. Has he spoken? What does he say of his defeat? Could he know the extent of... But no.
He's spoken only enough, my lord, to reveal his belief that the Lady Jessica was his betrayer.
You're sure? It's the Lady Jessica who attracts his anger?
He said it in my presence, my lord.
Let him think she's alive, then.
But my lord,
Be quiet. I wish Howard treated kindly. He must be told nothing of the late Dr. Yui, his true betrayer. Let it be said that Dr. Yui died defending his duke. In a way, this may even be true. We will instead feed his suspicions against the Lady Jessica.
my lord, I don't.
The way to control and direct a Mentat in their food is through his information. False information, false results.
Yes, my lord, but
Is Howard hungry? Thirsty?
my lord, Howard's still in the hands of the Sardaukar.
Yes, indeed, yes. But the Sardaukar will be as anxious to get information from Howard as I am. I've noticed a thing about our allies in the food. They're not very devious. I do believe this is a deliberate
They're
thing.
not very
The
devious.
Emperor wants it that way. Yes, I do believe it.
That's hilarious.
You will remind the Sardaukar commander of my renown at obtaining information from reluctant subjects.
Yes, my lord.
You will tell the Sardaukar commander that I wish to question both Hawat and his kinds at the same time, playing one off against the other. He can understand that much, I think.
Yes, my lord.
And once we have them in our hands,
My lord, the Sardaukar will want an observer with you during any questioning.
I'm sure we can produce an emergency to draw off any unwanted observers, Nefud.
I understand, my lord. That's when Kynes can have his accident.
Both Kynes and Hawat will have accidents then, Nefud. But only Kynes will have a real accident. It's Hawat I want. Yes. Ah, yes.
Nefud blinked, swallowed. He appeared about to ask a question, but remained silent.
Hawat will be given both food and drink, treated with kindness, with sympathy. In his water, you will administer the residual poison developed by the late Peter de Vries. And you will see that the antidote becomes a regular part of Hawat's diet from this point on.
Holy
Unless
shit.
I say otherwise.
The antidote, yes, but
Don't be dense, Nefud. The Duke almost killed me with that poison capsule tooth. The gas he exhaled into my presence deprived me of my most valuable mentat. Peter, I need a replacement.
Howat?
Hawat.
But
You're going to say Hawat's completely loyal to the Atreides. True, but the Atreides are dead. We will woo him. He must be convinced
will
he's
woo
not to blame for the Duke's demise. It was all the doing of that Bene Gesserit
Now, this
witch.
motherfucker.
He had an inferior master, one whose reason was clouded by emotion. Mentats admire the ability to calculate without emotion, Nefud. We will woo the formidable Thufir Hawat.
woo him. Yes, my lord.
Hawat unfortunately had a master whose resources were poor, one who could not elevate a Mentat to the sublime peaks of reasoning that are a Mentat's right. Hawat will see a certain element of truth in this. The Duke couldn't afford the most efficient spies to provide his Mentat with the required information. Let us never deceive ourselves, Nefud. The truth is a powerful weapon. We know how we overwhelmed the Atreides. Hawat knows too. We did it with wealth.
With wealth. Yes, my lord.
We will woo Hawat. We will hide him from the Sardaukar. And we will hold in reserve the withdrawal of the antidote for the poison. There's no way of removing the residual poison. And the food Hawat need never suspect. The antidote will not betray itself to a poison sniffer. Hawat can scan his food as he pleases and detect no trace of poison.
Nefud's eyes opened wide with understanding.
The absence of a thing, this can be as deadly as the presence. The absence of air, huh? The absence of water, the absence of anything else we're addicted to. You understand me, Nefud?
Yes, my lord.
Then get busy.
God damn.
Find the Sardaukar commander and set things in motion.
At once, my lord.
Nefud bowed, turned, and hurried away. Hawat, by my side, the Baron thought. The Sardaukar will give him to me. If they suspect anything at all, it's that I wish to destroy the Mentat. And this suspicion I'll confirm. The fools. One of the most formidable Mentats in all history. A Mentat trained to kill, and they'll toss him to me like some silly toy to be broken. I will show them what use can be made of such a toy. The Baron reached beneath a drapery beside his dispenser bed, pressed a button to summon his older nephew, Ravan. He sat back, smiling. and all the Atreides dead. The stupid guard captain had been right, of course. Certainly nothing survived in the path of a sandblast storm on Arrakis. Not an ornithopter or its occupants. The woman and the boy were dead. The bribes in the right places, the unthinkable expenditure to bring overwhelming military force down onto one planet, all the sly reports tailored for the Emperor's ears alone, all the careful scheming, were here at last coming to full fruition. Power and fear. Fear and power. The Baron could see the path ahead of him. One day, a Harkonnen would be Emperor. Not himself, and no spawn of his loins, but a Harkonnen. Not this Raban he'd summoned, of course, but Raban's younger brother, young Feyd-Rautha. There was a sharpness to the boy that the Baron enjoyed, a ferocity. A lovely boy, the Baron thought. A year or two more, say, by the time he's 17, I'll know for certain whether he's the tool that House Harkonnen requires to gain the throne.
My Lord Baron.
The man who stood outside the doorfield of the Baron's bedchamber was low-built, gross of face and body, with the Harkonnen paternal line's narrow-set eyes and bulge of shoulders. There was yet some rigidity in his fat, but it was obvious to the eye that he'd come one day to the portable suspensors for carrying his excess weight. A muscle-minded tank brain, the Baron thought. No mentat, my nephew. Not a Piter de Vries, but perhaps something more precisely devised for the task at hand. If I give him freedom to do it, he'll grind over everything in his path. Oh, how he'll be hated here on Arrakis.
My dear Raban.
The Baron released the doorfield, but pointedly kept his body shield at full strength, knowing that the shimmer of it would be visible above the bedside glow globe.
You summoned me?
Raban stepped into the room, flicked a glance past the air disturbance of the body shield, searched for a suspensor chair, found none.
Stand closer where I can see you easily.
Raban advanced another step, thinking that the damnable old man had deliberately removed all chairs, forcing a visitor to stand.
The Atreides are dead, the last of them. That's why I summoned you here to Arrakis. This planet is again yours.
But I thought you were going to advance Piter de Vries to the...
Piter too is dead.
Piter?
Piter.
The Baron reactivated the doorfield, blanked it against all energy penetration.
You're finally tired of him, eh?
I will say a thing to you just this once. You insinuate that I obliterated Piter as one obliterates a trifle. Just like that, huh? I'm not so stupid, nephew. I will take it unkindly if ever again you suggest by word or action that I am so stupid.
Fear showed in the squinting of Raban's eyes. He knew within certain limits how far the old Baron would go against family, seldom to the point of death, unless there were outrageous profit or provocation in it. But family punishments could be painful.
Forgive me, my Lord Baron.
Raban lowered his eyes, as much to hide his own anger as to show subservience.
You do not fool me, Raban.
Raban kept his eyes lowered, swallowed.
I make a point. Never obliterate a man unthinkingly, the way an entire fief might do it through some due process of law. Always do it for an overriding purpose, and know your purpose.
But you obliterated the traitor Yui. I saw his body being carried out as I arrived last night.
Raban stared at his uncle, suddenly frightened by the sound of those words. But the Baron smiled.
I'm very careful about dangerous weapons. Dr. Yui was a traitor. He gave me the Duke. I suborned a doctor of the Suk school, the inner school. You hear, boy? But that's a wild sort of weapon to be lying about. I didn't obliterate him casually.
Does the Emperor know you suborned a Suk doctor?
This was a penetrating question, the Baron thought. Have I misjudged this nephew?
The Emperor doesn't know it yet, but his Sardaukar are sure to report it to him. Before that happens, though, I'll have my own report in his hands through Chom Company channels. I will explain that I luckily discovered a doctor who pretended to the conditioning. A false doctor, you understand? Since everyone knows you cannot counter the conditioning of a soup school, this will be accepted.
I see.
And the Baron thought, indeed, I hope you do see. I hope you do see how vital it is that this remains secret. The Baron suddenly wondered at himself, why did I do that? Why did I boast to this fool nephew of mine, the nephew I must use and discard? The Baron felt anger at himself. He felt betrayed.
It must be kept secret. I understand.
I give you different instructions about Arrakis this time, nephew. When last you ruled this place, I held you in strong reign. This time, I have only one requirement.
My lord.
Income.
Income?
Have you any idea, Raban, how much we spend to bring such military force to bear on the Atreides? Do you have even the first inkling of how much the Guild charges for military transport?
Expensive, eh?
Expensive?
The Baron shot a fat arm toward Raban.
If you squeeze Arrakis for every cent it can give us for 60 years, you'll just barely repay us.
Raban opened his mouth, closed it, without speaking.
Expensive? The damnable Guild monopoly on space would have ruined us if I hadn't planned for this expense long ago. You should know, Raban, that we bore the entire brunt of it. We even paid for transport of the Sardaukar.
And not for the first time, the Baron wondered if there ever would come a day when the Guild might be circumvented. They were insidious, bleeding off just enough to keep the host from objecting until they had you in their fist, where they could force you to pay and pay and pay. Always the exorbitant demands rode upon military ventures. Hazard rates, the oily Guild agents explained. And for every agent you managed to insert as a watchdog in the Guild-backed structure, they put 2 agents into your system. Insufferable.
Income, then.
The Baron lowered his arm, made a fist.
You must squeeze.
And I may do anything I wish as long as I squeeze.
Anything.
The cannons you brought. Could I?
I'm removing.
But you...
You won't need such toys. They were a special innovation and are now useless. We need the metal. They cannot go against the shield, Raban. They were merely the unexpected. It was predictable that the Duke's men would retreat into cliff caves on this abominable planet. Our cannon merely sealed them in.
The Fremen don't use shields.
You may keep some laser guns if you wish.
Yes, my lord. And I have a free hand.
As long as you squeeze.
I understand perfectly, my lord.
You understand nothing perfectly. Let us have that clear.
You understand nothing
What you do
perfectly.
understand is how to carry out my orders. Has it occurred to you, nephew, that there are at least 5 million persons on this planet?
Does my lord forget that I was his regent Siradar here before? And if my lord will forgive me, his estimate may be low. It's difficult to count a population scattered amongst sinks and pans the way they are here. And when you consider the Fremen of...
The Fremen aren't worth considering.
Damn.
Forgive me, my lord, but the Sardaukar believe otherwise.
You know something?
My lord had retired when I arrived last night. I took the liberty of contacting some of my lieutenants from before. They've been acting as guides to the Sardaukar. They report that a Fremen band ambushed a Sardaukar force somewhere southeast of here and wiped it out.
Wiped out a Sardaukar force?
Yes, my lord.
Impossible. Fremen defeating Sardaukar?
I repeat only what was reported to me. It is said this Fremen force already had captured the Duke's redoubtable Thufir Howard.
Ah.
And I always realized that homeboy lied to him.
You've no idea what a problem the Fremen were.
Perhaps, but these weren't Fremen your lieutenant saw. They must have been Atreides men trained by Howard and disguised as Fremen. It's the only possible answer.
Well, the Sardaukar think they were Fremen. The Sardaukar have already launched a program to wipe out all Fremen.
Good.
But
It'll keep the Sardaukar occupied. And we'll soon have Howard. I know it. I can feel it. Oh, this has been a day. The Sardaukar off hunting a few useless desert bands while we get the real prize.
My lord, I've always felt that we underestimated the Fremen, both in numbers and in...
Ignore them, boy. They're rabble. It's the populous towns, cities, and villages that concern us. A great many people there, eh?
A great many, my lord.
They worry me, Raban.
Worry you?
Oh, 90% of them are of no concern, but there are always a few houses minor and so on. People of ambition who might try a dangerous thing. If one of them should get off Arrakis with an unpleasant story about what happened here, I'd be most displeased. Have you any idea how displeased I'd be?
Raban swallowed.
You must take immediate measures to hold a hostage from each house minor. As far as anyone off Arrakis must learn, this was straightforward house-to-house battle. The Sardaukar had no part in it, you understand? The Duke was offered the usual quarter in exile, but he died in an unfortunate accident before he could accept. He was about to accept, though. That is the story. And any rumor that there were Sardaukar here, it must be laughed at.
As the Emperor wishes it.
As the Emperor wishes it.
What about the smugglers?
No one believes smugglers, Raban. They are tolerated but not believed. At any rate, you'll be spreading some bribes in that quarter, and taking other measures which I'm sure you can think of.
Yo, this is a sinister conversation. Holy shit.
Then, Raban, in come any merciless fist. You must show no mercy here. Think of these claws as what they are, slaves envious of their masters and waiting only the opportunity to rebel. Not the slightest vestige of pity or mercy must you show them.
Can one exterminate an entire planet?
Exterminate? Who said anything about exterminating?
Well, I presumed you were going to bring in new stock and...
I said squeeze, nephew, not exterminate. Don't waste the population, merely drive them into utter submission. You must be the carnivore, my boy.
The Baron smiled, a baby's expression in the dimpled fat face.
A carnivore never stops. Show no mercy, never stop. Mercy is a chimera. It can be defeated by the stomach rumbling its hunger, by the throat crying its thirst. You must always be hungry and thirsty.
The Baron caressed his bulges beneath the suspensors.
Like me.
I see, my lord.
Raban swung his gaze left and right.
It's all clear then, nephew?
Except for one thing, Uncle. The planetologist, Kynes.
Ah, yes. Kynes.
He's the Emperor's man, my lord. He can come and go as he pleases. And he's very close to the Fremen. Married one.
Kynes will be dead by tomorrow's nightfall.
That's dangerous work, Uncle. Killing an Imperial servant.
How do you think I've come this far this quickly? Besides, you need never have feared Kynes will leave Arrakis. You're forgetting that he's addicted to the spice.
Of course.
Those who know will do nothing to endanger their supply. Kynes certainly must know.
I forgot.
They stared at each other in silence.
Incidentally, you will make my own supply one of your first concerns. I have quite a stockpile of private stuff, but that suicide raid by the Duke's men got most of what we'd stored for sale.
Yes, my lord.
Raban nodded, and the Baron brightened.
Now, tomorrow morning, you will assemble what remains of organization here, and you'll say to them, our sublime Padishah Emperor has charged me to take possession of this planet and end all dispute.
I understand, my lord.
This time, I'm sure you do. We will discuss it in more detail tomorrow. Now, leave me to finish my scene.
The Baron deactivated his door field, watched his nephew out of sight. A tank brain, the Baron thought. Muscle-minded tank brain. They will be bloody pulp here when he's through with them. Then, when I send in Fade Routher to take the load off them, they'll cheer their rescuer. Beloved Fade Routher, benign Fade Routher, the compassionate one who saves them from a beast. Fade Routher, a man to follow and die for. The boy will know by that time how to oppress with impunity. I'm sure he's the one we need. He'll learn.
You know, I want to throw out one theory. it's not the craziest theory, but for the movie before it comes out, I'm wondering, like, because Fade Rotha hasn't been casted, or at least it's not public knowledge yet as to who's playing him. I'm wondering, like, I think it might be kind of cool if they had Timothy Chalamet play Fade Rotha. They just give him like a blonde wig or something, you know? They put him in some makeup to kind of make him like an ugly version of himself. Kind of the Harkonnen version. Because technically they are family and things like that. And I was just like, man, I wonder if they go that route. Because they are related. I think they're only like cousins. And, cousins can look like each other. So if you just take him and then, throw some makeup and prosthetics on him, and now all of a sudden he's like some, Billy Joel version looking of him. Oh, who's the guy who played him back in the old movie? Anyways, if he was like that version. But Timothy Chalamet being Fade Roth, I was just like, that's what I've been thinking for a while. After it's like clear that no one's like saying who he is, and people are worried if he's even going to be in this movie. But anyways.
Such a lovely body. Really a lovely boy.
At the age of 15, he had already learned silence. From a child's history of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
As Paul fought the Thopter's controls, he grew aware that he was sorting out the interwoven storm forces, his more than mentat awareness computing on the basis of fractional minutiae. He felt dust fronts, billowings, mixings of turbulence, an occasional vortex. The cabin interior was an angry box lighted by the green radiance of instrument dials. The tan flow of dust outside appeared featureless, but his inner sense began to see through the curtain. I must find the right vortex, he thought. For a long time now he had sensed the storm's power diminishing, but still it shook them. He waited out another turbulence. The vortex began as an abrupt billowing that rattled the entire ship. Paul defied all fear to bank the Thopter left. Jessica saw the maneuver on the altitude globe. "Paul!" she screamed. The vortex turned them, twisting, tipping. It lifted the Thopter like a chip on a geyser, spewed them up and out, a winged speck within a core of winding dust lighted by the second moon. Paul looked down, saw the dust-defined pillar of hot wind that had disgorged them, saw the dying storm trailing away like a dry river into the desert, moon-grey motion growing smaller and smaller below as they rode the outdraft. "We're out of it," Jessica whispered. Paul turned their craft away from the dust in swooping rhythm while he scanned the night sky. "We've given them the slip," he said. Jessica felt her heart pounding. She forced herself to calmness, looked at the diminishing storm. Her time sense said they had ridden within that compounding of elemental forces almost 4 hours. But part of her mind computed the passage as a lifetime. She felt reborn. It was like the litany, she thought. We faced it and did not resist. The storm passed through us and around us. It's gone, but we remain.
Foreshadowing.
"I don't like the sound of our wing motion," Paul said. "We suffered some damage in there." He felt the grating, injured flight through his hands on the controls. They were out of the storm, but still not out into the full view of his prescient vision. Yet they had escaped,
and Paul sensed himself trembling on the verge of a revelation. He shivered. The sensation was magnetic and terrifying, and he found himself caught on the question of what caused this trembling awareness. Part of it, he felt, was the spice-saturated diet of Arrakis, but he thought part of it could be the litany, as though the words had a power of their own. I shall not fear. Cause and effect. He was alive despite malignant forces, and he felt himself poised on a brink of self-awareness that could not have been without the litany's magic. Words from the Orange Catholic Bible rang through his memory. What senses do we lack, that we cannot see or hear another world all around us? There's rock all around, Jessica said. Paul, focused on the Thopter's launching, shook his head to clear it. He looked where his mother pointed, saw uplifting rock shapes black on the sand ahead and to the right. He felt wind around his ankles, a stirring of dust in the cabin. There was a hole somewhere. More of the storm's doing. Better set us down on sand, Jessica said. The wings might not take full break. He nodded toward a place ahead where sand-blasted ridges lifted into moonlights above the dunes. I'll set us down near those rocks. Check your safety harness. She obeyed, thinking, we've water and spill suits. If we can find food, we can survive a long time on this desert. Fremen live here. What they can do, we can do. Run for those rocks the instant we're stopped, Paul said. I'll take the pack. Run for... She fell silent, nodded. Worms. Our friends, the worms, he corrected her. They'll get this Thopter. There'll be no evidence of where we landed. How direct his thinking, she thought. They glided lower, lower. There came a rushing sense of motion to their passage, blurred shadows of dunes, rocks lifting like islands. The Thopter touched a dune top with a soft lurch, skipped a sand valley, touched another dune. He's killing our speed against the sand, Jessica thought, and permitted herself to admire his competence. Brace yourself, Paul warned. He pulled back on the wing brakes, gently at first, then harder and harder. He felt them cup the air, their aspect ratio dropping faster and faster. Wind screamed through the lat coverts and primaries of the wing's leaves. Abruptly, with only the faintest lurch of warning, the left wing, weakened by the storm, twisted upward and in, slamming across the side of the Thopter. The craft skidded across a dune top, twisting to the left. It tumbled down the opposite face to bury its nose in the next dune amid a cascade of sand. They lay stopped on the broken wing side, the right wing pointing toward the stars. Paul jerked off his safety harness, hurled himself upward across his mother, wrenching the door open. Sand poured around them into the cabin, bringing a dry smell of burned flint. He grabbed the pack from the rear, saw that his mother was free of her harness. She stepped up onto the side of the right-hand seat and out onto the Thopter's metal skin. Paul followed, dragging the pack by its straps. Run! He ordered. He pointed up the dune face and beyond it, where they could see a rock tower undercut by sand-blast winds. Jessica leaped off the Thopter and ran, scrambling and sliding up the dune. She heard Paul's panting progress behind. They came out onto a sand ridge that curved away toward the rocks. Follow the ridge, Paul ordered. It'll be faster. They slogged toward the rocks, sand gripping their feet.
This is going to be the introduction to Chani.
A muted whisper, a hissing, an abrasive slithering. Worm, Paul said. It grew louder. Faster, Paul gasped. The first rock shingle, like a beach slanting from the sand, lay no more than 10 meters ahead when they heard metal crunch and shatter behind them. Paul shifted his pack to his right arm, holding it by the straps. It slapped his side as he ran. He took his mother's arm with his other hand. They scrambled onto the lifting rock up a pebble-littered surface through a twisted, wind-carved channel. Breath came dry and gasping in their throats. I can't run any farther, Jessica panted. Paul stopped, pressed her into a gut of rock, turned and looked down onto the desert.
A mound in motion ran parallel to their rock island. Moonlit ripples, sand waves, a cresting burrow almost level with Paul's eyes at a distance of about a kilometre. The flattened dunes of its track curved once, a short loop crossing the patch of desert where they had abandoned their wrecked ornithopter. Where the worm had been, there was no sign of the aircraft. The burrow mound moved outward into the desert, coursed back across its own path, questing. It's bigger than a guild spaceship, Paul whispered. I was told worms grew large in the deep desert, but I didn't realize how big. Nor I, Jessica breathed. Again the thing turned out, away from the rocks, sped now with a curving track toward the horizon. They listened until the sound of its passage was lost in gentle sand stirrings around them. Paul took a deep breath, looked up at the moon-frosted escarpment, and quoted from the Kitab al-Ibar. Travel by night and rest in black shade through the day. He looked at his mother. We still have a few hours of night. Can you go on? In a moment. Paul stepped out onto the rock shingle, shouldered the pack and adjusted its straps. He stood a moment with a paracompass in his hands. Whenever you're ready, he said. She pushed herself away from the rock, feeling her strength return. Which direction? Where this ridge leads, he pointed. Deep into the desert, she said. The Fremen Desert, Paul whispered. And he paused, shaken by the remembered high-relief imagery of a prescient vision he had experienced on Caladan. He had seen this desert, but the set of the vision had been subtly different, like an optical image that had disappeared into his consciousness, been absorbed by memory, and now failed of perfect registry when projected onto the real scene. The vision appeared to have shifted and approached him from a different angle while he remained motionless. Idaho was with us in the vision, he remembered. But now Idaho is dead. Do you see a way to go? Jessica asked, mistaking his hesitation. No, he said, but we'll go anyway. He settled his shoulders more firmly in the pack, struck out up a sand-carved channel in the rock. The channel opened onto a moonlit floor of rock with benched ledges climbing away to the south. Paul headed for the first ledge, clambered onto it. Jessica followed. She noted presently how their passage became a matter of the immediate and particular. The sand pockets between rocks where their steps were slowed, the wind-carved ridge that cut their hands, the obstruction that forced a choice, go over or go around. The terrain enforced its own rhythms. They spoke only when necessary, and then with the hoarse voices of their exertion. Careful here. This ledge is slippery with sand. Watch you don't hit your head against this overhang. Stay below this ridge. The moon's at our back, so that it'll show our movement to anyone out there. Paul, stop.
All right. Can't believe my butt didn't go back to sleep after that. Just in the beginning. Well, either way, we got another one down. It only took up 5 squares for all this stuff. I guess that was because all the clips, and there was only one scope for this one, so no need for a whole square for the scope. So I just combined it with the extra clips and all that, so or magazines. Anyways, hell yeah. I like this one. This one has a whole bunch of muzzles there, man. It's crazy. But anyways, gonna be the end of this one. I'm G Mr. Drew, at G Mr. Drew on all socials. Follow, like, and subscribe. Links are in bio, along with my website, gmrdrew.art. Check it out. Hit me up through there. Let me know if you want work. This is just me doing studies, but if you've been watching my channel at all, you know I do characters as well. Environments if you need it or want it. And then, yeah, I don't know if anybody would ever commission anybody for props, but fuck it. I mean, if you want me to, I'll do it. Anyways, man, I'm on Patreon. You can support me through there if you wish. And, starting as low as $1. But starting at 3, you could actually get commissions and things like that from me. And then it goes up from there. Check them all out. And other than that, man, I just want to thank anyone and everyone for watching, man. Thanks for sticking by and watching me do these things. Hopefully they're getting interesting. I love this shit. I love this shit. Like, I like all the screws and bolts on these guns. Like, that's always cool to me. But, like, the little breathers here for the fire and all that. I love that shit. Just the aesthetic that it gives. It's pretty wild. But anyways, what time is it? Yeah, I definitely don't. If I do another stream, it'll only be like part. It'll, you know, it's gonna be the last assault rifle, and it'll only be part of it. So I don't know if it's like worth it or not. So I mean, honestly, I probably won't be back, but you know, I'll give it a look-see, because this one may not be as involved as all the other ones I've worked on. Let's see, this video is 2.5 hours instead of 3, and it's only 5, and the next assault rifle has even less gadgets to it, so it may be maybe a shorter video and maybe worth doing. So we'll see. I'm gonna stand on my feet and get off my ass for a minute. Continue listening to this Dune audiobook, and hope that it doesn't get me DMCA'd on when these things go up on YouTube way later. Oh well. Love y'all. Peace.